Have you ever thought about prisons? What are they there for? As a punishment that makes the offender pay? A form of justice? Or is there more to it than that? And have you ever considered what life inside prison can do to a person psychologically? Hey everyone, welcome back to Bear It In Mind. In this video we're going to explore custodial sentencing, in other words, prisons, including the aims and psychological effects of custodial sentencing, many of which are deeply impactful and often negative, with effects that can last far beyond release. But before we dive in, if you're studying A-level Psychology and want further resources to help you, consider joining Bear It In Mind, where you'll find exam paper walkthroughs, fully written exemplar essays, revision worksheets, interactive quizzes, video tutorials and much more to help you master psychology. Custodial sentencing refers to confining individuals in prison or similar institutions for a defined length of time as punishment for their crimes. But what exactly is custodial sentencing trying to achieve when we lock someone up? It's been suggested that custodial sentencing has 4 aims. Retribution is a punishment that makes the offender pay for the crime they committed. It's about justice and making the punishment fit the crime. It's society's way of holding offenders accountable for their actions by giving them a penalty that reflects the seriousness of their crime. Next, we have rehabilitation. Rehabilitation aims to help offenders change so they're ready to rejoin society when they're released. This goal looks beyond punishment and focuses on the idea that with the right programs like counselling, job training or education, people can reform. The hope here is that if offenders learn new skills or overcome personal challenges, they'll be less likely to reoffend once they're back in society. Now let's talk about incapacitation. This is about protecting the public by physically preventing the offender from committing more crimes. Incapacitation focuses on safety by keeping offenders away from society for a set period, reducing the immediate risk of reoffending. Last, we have deterrence. Deterrence aims to discourage people from committing crimes by seeing the negative consequences of such behaviour. Deterrence works in 2 ways. Personal deterrence is aimed at the offender. After experiencing the hardships of prison, they're supposed to be discouraged from committing more crimes. Then there's general deterrence, which uses the punishment of one person as a warning for everybody else. By seeing someone else go to prison, others in society are hopefully discouraged from similar actions. It's vicarious learning. People see the consequences and ideally think twice. Now have a think for a moment. Which of the aims of custodial sentencing do you think is the most important? Whenever I ask my students this question, there is often a significant disagreement. Let me know in the comments below what you think. My next question though is, of the 4 aims, which one do you think prisons are the worst at? Interestingly, this is where most people agree. Again, let me know your thoughts below. Recidivism refers to the tendency of previously convicted offenders to reoffend after they've been released from custody. Recidivism rates help measure how effective prisons are in preventing future crimes. How does this relate to the aims of custodial sentencing we just considered? Well, retribution is focused on punishment rather than reducing recidivism. Retribution alone does not directly target the causes of recidivism. Rehabilitation specifically targets recidivism by addressing the underlying issues that may lead to criminal behaviour, such as addiction, lack of education, or social skills. In terms of incapacitation, while an offender is in prison, obviously they are unable to commit crimes in society, temporarily preventing recidivism. However, once released, the risk of reoffending remains unless other interventions have been successful. And one aim of deterrence is to reduce recidivism by making the experience of prison unpleasant enough to discourage offenders from committing further crimes. If deterrence is successful, recidivism rates should decrease. So how well do you think prisons are doing when it comes to recidivism? And how would you know? Well, this is where recidivism rates come in. In the UK, recidivism rates for individuals who've been in prison are notably high. Recent data shows that for those serving short sentences of less than 12 months, 63% of adults released from custody commit a proven reoffence within a year of their release. And there are several factors that affect recidivism, many of which relate to this next section. We've seen so far that custodial sentencing, or imprisonment, is one of the justice system's primary ways of punishing crime. But what can life inside prison do to a person psychologically? Let's start with institutionalization. Prisons are highly controlled environments where every detail of daily life, when to eat, when to sleep, is structured and supervised. Over time, this lack of autonomy can lead to feelings of helplessness and depression. Long-term prisoners often become so accustomed to prison structure that they struggle to manage with life outside of prison. Simple tasks like managing time, making decisions, and even social interactions can feel overwhelming. This can lead some individuals to fall back into crime in order to return to prison. They want to go back to what they know and have become familiar with. Next, there's brutalization. This refers to how prison can make a person cruel, violent, or insensitive to the pain of others because of repeated exposure to violence. Often assaults in prison are motivated by a desire to gain the respect of other prisoners, to demonstrate their toughness and willingness to use violence. For some, prison becomes what is often referred to as a school for crime. In an environment where criminal behaviour may be reinforced and networks for crime built, prisoners can become more deeply ingrained in a criminal lifestyle. Number 3, psychological problems in prison populations. Life in prison also sees high rates of mental health issues. Depression and anxiety are common, often driven by fear for one's safety or the general lack of control inmates have over their environment. In fact, the rates of self-harm and suicide in prison are significantly higher than in the general population. Another powerful factor is labelling. Being labelled a criminal or ex-prisoner can cause stigma that's hard to shake even after release. This can damage self-esteem, isolate individuals from support networks, and reduce their employability. Many inmates also lose key social roles, like being a parent, a spouse, or worker, which can lead to an identity crisis and a loss of self-worth. This sense of isolation and rejection from society can increase their likelihood of reoffending as they struggle to see a positive path forward. Is there any research evidence for the negative effects of prisons? Well, you may remember a very famous study from the social influence topic called the Stanford Prison Experiment, led by psychologist Philip Zimbardo in 1971. The experiment simulated prison conditions so effectively that the participants randomly assigned as guards or prisoners quickly showed behaviours and responses that reflect the psychological impact observed in real prison settings. For example, several participants in the study displayed signs of severe emotional distress, including breakdowns, hunger strikes, and humiliation. In real prisons, conditions of confinement, lack of social support, and constant vigilance contribute to higher rates of mental health issues among inmates, such as depression, anxiety, and PTSD. The Stanford Prison Experiment demonstrated how quickly psychological deterioration can occur in such environments. However, we should be cautious in using Zimbardo's study as evidence because it lacks ecological validity. Critics argue that the Stanford Prison Experiment lacked ecological validity due to the following factors. Firstly, artificial environment. Although the experiment aimed to simulate a prison, it was conducted in the basement of the psychology building at Stanford University and not an actual prison. Secondly, role-playing. Participants were aware they were taking part in a study, which may have led them to exaggerate their behaviours. Number 3, short duration. The experiment was ended after only 6 days, whereas real-life prison sentences can last years or even decades. The short time frame means the psychological effects seen in the Stanford Prison Experiment likely do not capture the full depth and long-term effects that occur over years in prison. Therefore, it could be argued that Zimbardo's study tells us little about the negative negative effects of prisons because these limitations make it difficult to generalise Zimbardo's findings to real prison environments. A major criticism of research on the psychological effects of prisons is the problem of cause and effect. This is because it can be difficult to establish whether the negative psychological effects observed in prisoners, such as depression, anxiety, or institutionalization, are caused by imprisonment itself, or if they stem from pre-existing conditions. To truly identify the cause, longitudinal studies would need to assess prisoners' mental health before, during, and after being in prison. However, such studies are rare and difficult to conduct, partly because the difficulties of following prisoners over time and controlling for external factors. This leaves much of the existing research correlational rather than causal. Despite these negative psychological effects, custodial sentencing can still serve several important functions within the criminal justice system. For example, one of the primary reasons for prisons is to protect society by physically removing individuals who pose a significant danger. This provides a sense of safety for the public, particularly for victims and communities affected by crime. Whilst rehabilitation is clearly not working in prisons, some argue that it's still fulfilling some of its other roles, such as retribution and incapacitation, which has led some to argue that these benefits outweigh the negative drawbacks of prisons. Finally, one of the key criticisms of custodial sentencing is its failure to address the needs of victims. This is because victims of crimes are often sidelined in the traditional criminal justice process. While custodial sentencing focuses on punishing and rehabilitating offenders, it can leave victims feeling disconnected and unsupported, as they are usually the least involved in the proceedings. In comparison, restorative justice offers an alternative that prioritises the victim's role, allowing them to engage actively in the justice process, which can lead to greater healing and closure, and in some cases has found to also help lower recidivism rates in prisoners. But more on restorative justice in a future video. Next, we're going to explore another way of dealing with offending that involves exchanging tokens for a reward. Fancy another hour of TV or another phone call whilst in prison? Better be a good boy then. To watch that, you can click the video on the screen now or link below, and for more resources related to psychology, check out the Bear It in Mind website.